Hey, everybody. Glad to be here with you on this part of leading a strong life. It's been great to be on here the past few weeks. And today I want to talk about blind spots. Blind spots. Do you know what your blind spots are? Do you have them? Well, the answer is yes, you have them. Are you aware of them? Maybe not. That's why they're called blind spots, right? And blind spots, what I love to do in my classes when we start talking about this is I start talking about, cars. We have blind spots in our cars, right? And we're supposed to set our side view mirrors up to where we can see someone when they're in our blind spot so we don't hit them. So what I like to talk about is that blind spots, they can cause a lot of damage if you don't know what to look for. And today the cars, they've got things on the rearview mirrors because people don't set them right? So they don't see stuff. So they've got this little light that blinks, right? Blinks. And it says blind spot, blind spot, blind spot. Watch out, be aware, right? Well, do we have that light that blinks when we're talking with people? When we go into a conversation with somebody that has a different perspective than what we have? Is there a light going, oh, careful, don't say that, blind spot, you're about to, you're about to cause some damage that you're unaware of. And we just don't know those. And I love a conversation between John Maxwell and Miles McPherson last week that just really inspired me to talk about this. And they said, hey, if you meet somebody that doesn't, says that they don't have blind spots, nice to meet you, Jesus. In other words, we all have blind spots. How do you become aware of those blind spots? If somebody says, hey, they're self-aware, that's not true. You can't become self-aware about your blind spots. It's just not possible. You're blind to them. So how do you become aware of your blind spots? You invite people into your life to speak to you from outside of your perspective, outside of the picture. And it's something that's very difficult to do. And people have probably tried to help you identify your blind spots in the past. And the question is, how did you respond to them? And that's what I want to talk to you about today. How do you respond? So if somebody comes into your life and they identify a blind spot, what most people do, they get defensive. If this, but this, if they did this, I wouldn't get this angry, I wouldn't get this mad if they didn't do this. Yeah, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, right? No. How you respond determines if you're going to find out about any more of your blind spots that are causing damage, causing you to be less effective in all that you do. And listen, we're all leaders, we're all influencers, no matter what we're doing. And so when I'm talking with people that are leading teams, man, they're doing stuff all the time that blind spot and causing damage. So here's the deal. If you go to someone and ask them, hey, is there anything that I do that's a blind spot? And a blind spot, let me define it. It's the gap between intent and impact. And I heard that from Miles McPherson last week. It was so good. The gap between intent and impact. So is there anything that I do that's offensive or that causes damage that I can work on to be more effective with you? And if they give you some type of insight, you take that and you say, thank you. Don't start giving excuses. Don't start defending. And say, I'll work on that. And you really want to up your game? You really want to become more effective and increase your leadership ability? After you get that information, go back to the person a week later and said, hey, I've really reflected on what you've told me and I've worked on it. Have you seen a difference? Have you seen a change in what I'm doing? It's huge. Again, your response is going to determine whether you hear about any more blind spots that you have. So let me give you a couple of mine and some examples and some things to think about that people have worked on with me. One of the biggest ones that was so hard for me was pride and arrogance and ego. So I was coaching in front of a mentor coach of mine. So I was on the phone coaching an individual, and there were 200 people listening in. And so I could grow to become a better coach. When I was done with the coaching session, my mentor asked me, he goes, Bron, what were you thinking about while you were coaching this individual? And I go, well, I wanted them to get an aha. I wanted them to get a takeaway. I wanted to make sure that they got something they could take away from. And he said, Bron, until you get your ego, your pride, and your arrogance out of the way, you won't be able to serve anyone. And I was like, what are you talking about? I was trying to add value to them. I was focused on them. He goes, no, you were so concerned about them getting an aha from you, you got in the way of serving them. I had no idea. It was a blind spot, right? Blinking. And if he hadn't pointed that out to me on my awareness, I would have continued forward in that, getting in the way of serving my clients. Another one of mine, efficiency over effectiveness. And I see Tracy on here, and he wants me to do a story around nonstick pans. I'm going to hold off on for just time today, but I'll do it soon. But efficiency over effectiveness. I was causing lots of damage over choosing efficiency over effectiveness. What about, do I go towards toxic honesty? Like I just tell people what they want to hear, no matter how it makes them feel. That could be a blind spot. Or I could be on the other side, on artificial harmony. I just won't say anything. And then keep going. Never apologizing or apologizing all the time. Either one of those could be a blind spot. False humility could be a blind spot. False humility. I've heard someone say it could even be blasphemy to God. Like in other words, oh, I'm so meek. No, God's gifted you. God's given you strengths. God's given you things. Don't be false. Don't put on false humility. We can be confident and humble at the same time. A scarcity mindset was a blind spot for me. Anger and yelling were a blind spot for me. I read in a book, so a book could help me identify it, but I've got to work on it. I read in a book, if I'm yelling at my children, it's my sin. Again, ifs and buts. Well, if they didn't do this, if they didn't do this. No, if I'm yelling, it's my sin. I have a choice. And it was a blind spot for me because it's what I knew growing up. Hey, you can yell, right? That's how you get things done. It's efficient, but not effective, right? So it was a blind spot of mine. Bitterness was a blind spot of mine, holding on to some bitterness in some areas, some unforgiveness in some areas. In my faith, I had a lot of blind spots. Growing up, we each have, this is what I loved about the Miles McPherson thing. He said we all grow up in our social narrative. So if you grew up in a certain church and they did things in a certain way, that's the way you go. And you might have blind spots in certain areas. Are you willing to take yourself on to identify these blind spots? So in our faith, we could have some blind spots there. I had some. And he said we're all a part of in-groups and out-groups. And if we're in an in-group, we know what's going on here. But if there's these out-groups, these people that are outside of our groups, man, we have blind spots to what they do. And we need to get into those to understand some blind spots we might have. And over the last few weeks, it's been awesome having some really healthy conversations on understanding things that I just didn't understand before. So again, identify your blind spots. Invite people into your life to speak into it, to identify blind spots. And remember, your response is key. Thank you for sharing that. In a humble way. I appreciate the insights. I'm going to take this and reflect on it and see what I can do to improve. And then you want to really up your game, leaders, okay? Follow up. Hey, you told me this, listen, how am I doing in this? And do that week after week. You talk about your effectiveness going up, your leadership going up, your leadership ability, the impact that you can have. You talk about going from success to significance. The impact you'll have in the relationships around you is huge. And that's why I do everything that I do. So here's to leading a strong life, a brawny life, by identifying your blind spots and growing those blind spots so that you can have a more significant impact and enjoy relational freedom in all that you do. Thanks for being with me.